The capital city of Zitharon, built upon shimmering plains of silver stone, was a testament to Zarvokian supremacy. Its towering spires, angular and sharp, reached into the violet-tinted sky, catching the light of the twin suns. These architectural marvels symbolized the empire's unyielding strength and unassailable dominance. Yet, beneath their shadow, a figure slipped through the wide corridors of the imperial palace, avoiding the gaze of her own people. Princess Liara moved with measured steps, her head low and her slender shoulders drawn inward as if trying to disappear. Her cobalt-blue skin, marked by faint silver veins unique to Zarvokian royalty, did little to earn her respect. To the citizens of this militant empire, Liara embodied everything weak and undesirable. She was an anomaly in a society that revered strength above all else. Liara had spent her life enduring the scorn of her people, but their contempt wasn't entirely due to her fragile health. There had been whispers long before she was old enough to understand them. Rumors claimed she had been born under an ill omen during the rare eclipse of Zunsesun's, a celestial event that some believed to her held misfortune. While no Zarvokian would openly voice such superstitions, the timing of her birth had cemented her as a harbinger of weakness in the eyes of many. Her frailty only seemed to confirm their beliefs. The Zarvokians were an unforgiving race, shaped by millennia of warfare and conquest. Their culture celebrated physical dominance, tactical brilliance, and resilience. To falter in any of these was to invite disdain. Liara, with her slender limbs and soft-spoken nature, seemed to contradict everything the Zarvokians held sacred. Her father, King Zorvath, had spared no opportunity to remind her of this. In the Grand Council chamber, Zorvath stood at the center of a circular table, his golden armor gleaming under the crystalline light that refracted through the high ceiling. His imposing figure commanded attention, his every movement deliberate and powerful. Liara entered quietly, clutching a datapad to her chest, and took her usual place along the periphery of the room, where the council would forget her existence unless directly addressed. Late again, Princess Liara, Zorvath's voice boomed, cutting through the low murmurs of the council. His piercing golden eyes fixed on her, not with anger but with thinly veiled disappointment. "I apologize, Father," Liara replied, her voice steady despite the heat of his gaze. "It won't happen again." "It never should have happened at all," he snapped, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. The council members exchanged knowing smirks, their disdain for the princess barely concealed. As the meeting progressed, discussions turned to the growing tensions with Earth. Humanity, a relatively young and resourceful species, had made remarkable strides in technology and diplomacy. The Zarvokians considered them a potential ally, though one far beneath their status. Liara listened intently, though she avoided looking up. Her mind was sharp, and she often understood the nuances of politics better than her father's brutish advisors, but she knew better than to speak unless called upon. "They're requesting an alliance," one of the generals said, his voice laced with skepticism. "But do they truly offer us anything of value?" "Humans are opportunistic," another counselor sneered. "They'll use us until we're no longer convenient." King Zorvath's expression remained unreadable. "We don't need their friendship," he said coldly. "What we need is their submission. And submission is best achieved when loyalty is incentivized." A younger advisor leaned forward. "What if we solidify the alliance with the Union? A marriage between our empire and their leadership?" Zorvath's gaze turned icy as the room fell silent. Then, slowly, his eyes shifted toward Liara. "A union," he repeated, his voice low. "Yes, it would ensure their loyalty." Liara's heart sank. She felt the weight of the council stares as if they were physical chains binding her. She knew what was coming before her father spoke the words. "My daughter will go to Earth," Zorvath declared. "A marriage to one of their leaders will bind them to us. It's the only purpose she's suited for." Liara flinched inwardly but kept her face calm. "As you command, Father," she said softly, her tone devoid of resistance. She had learned long ago that defiance only invited greater humiliation. The council murmured their approval. To them, Liara was expendable, a pawn in their grand game of intergalactic dominance. Her departure was not seen as a loss but as a convenient solution to an embarrassing problem. The days leading up to her departure passed in a haze. The palace attendants avoided her, performing their duties with mechanical efficiency, but without warmth. Liara wandered the halls in solitude, her fingers tracing the cold, intricate patterns etched into the walls. She felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Zitharon had never been her home, not truly. Still, The thought of leaving it forever stirred a quiet ache in her chest. On the day of her departure, no one came to see her off, not even her father. Instead, a dour-faced advisor handed her a ceremonial blade, its hilt adorned with Zarvokian sigils. "A gift for your human husband," he said mockingly. "Try to make yourself useful." Liara accepted the blade without a word. She boarded the diplomatic vessel that would take her to Earth, her steps measured but heavy. As the ship lifted off, she gazed out the window at her homeworld shrinking into the distance. The twin suns cast their final rays over the horizon, and for a fleeting moment, she felt untethered, as if her very existence had been left behind. The journey to Earth took several days, during which Liara immersed herself in studying humanity. The datapad in her hands became her constant companion, offering glimpses into a species unlike her own. Humans were chaotic, diverse, and endlessly adaptable. They thrived not through strength but through ingenuity and collaboration. Their cultures were vibrant, their histories tumultuous, and their philosophies profound. For the first time, Liara felt a flicker of curiosity amidst her dread. When the ship finally descended into Earth's atmosphere, Liara pressed her hands against the window. The planet unfolded before her in a patchwork of green, blue, and swirling white clouds. It was alive in a way Zithran had never been. She inhaled sharply, captivated by the sheer beauty of it. At the landing bay, a human delegation awaited her. At their forefront stood Commander Frank Blake, the man who had accepted the marriage proposal. He was taller than she expected, his dark hair flecked with gray at the temples. His sharp features carried an air of authority, but his hazel eyes were warm, almost gentle. "Princess Liara," he greeted, his voice steady but kind. "Welcome to Earth." She hesitated, searching his expression for mockery or pity, but found neither. She inclined her head. "Commander Blake," she replied, her tone careful. "Thank you for receiving me." "Call me Frank," he said with a small smile. "Let's get one thing straight. You're not here as a symbol or a tool. You're here as my partner. We'll figure this out together." His words startled her. She had prepared for disdain, for manipulation, but not for kindness. For the first time in years, something within her stirred a fragile, tentative hope. As Frank gestured for her to follow him, Liara stepped forward, the weight of Zithran's scorn slowly lifting with every step toward an uncertain future. The landing bay buzzed with quiet activity. Uniformed personnel moved with precision, their voices low but purposeful. Liara stepped onto the tarmac, her cobalt blue skin catching the golden hues of Earth's late afternoon sun. The air smelled different here, cleaner, softer, with a faint trace of something floral she couldn't name. She paused, tilting her face to the sky, momentarily stunned by the warmth on her skin. Zithran's harsh twin suns never felt like this. Here sunlight embraced rather than scalded. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Frank Blake's voice interrupted her thoughts, but it wasn't unwelcome. He stood a few feet away, observing her reaction with a faint smile. His uniform, though utilitarian, carried an understated elegance, its dark fabric accented by silver insignias that denoted his rank. Liara nodded, unsure how to respond. She had no words for what she felt, a mixture of wonder and unease. "It's different," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. Frank gestured toward a sleek transport vehicle waiting nearby. "Let's get you settled. There's plenty of time to explore." She followed him, her steps measured. The transport's interior was minimalist but comfortable, its seats upholstered in a fabric that was cool to the touch. As the vehicle glided forward, Liara peered through the tinted windows, her eyes scanning the scenery. Rolling hills blanketed in green, winding rivers glinting like silver threads, and clusters of buildings that seemed to blend into the landscape. Earth didn't impose itself on its environment, it coexisted with it. That realization stirred something unfamiliar in her chest: admiration. Frank broke the silence. "This isn't quite the Earth you might read about. We've come a long way in the last century." She turned to him, curious. "How so?" "Global conflicts forced humanity to rethink everything: energy, governance, even how we live together. What you're seeing is a result of that. Cities are smaller, more sustainable. We've learned to take care of our planet because we almost lost it." His tone carried a mix of pride and humility, a stark contrast to the Zarvokian arrogance she had grown accustomed to. Liara hesitated before responding. "It sounds harmonious. Your people adapted." Frank's gaze lingered on her for a moment, as if weighing her words. "Adaptation is survival," he said simply. "Something humans are good at." The transport brought them to a compound perched on the edge of a sprawling forest. The buildings, constructed from polished stone and glass, radiated simplicity and purpose. Frank led her into a residence set apart from the others. Inside, the space felt open yet intimate. Light streamed through wide windows, casting warm hues over the wooden floors. It lacked the sterile opulence of Zitharon's palaces, but it was undeniably welcoming. "This will be your space," Frank said, motioning around. "It's not as grand as what you're used to, but I hope you'll find it comfortable." Liara stepped further in, her fingers brushing the edge of a table carved from a single piece of dark wood. It was imperfect, its surface marked with natural grain lines. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. Frank tilted his head, a trace of humor in his expression. "Not what you expected." She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but perhaps that's a good thing." His smile widened, but he didn't press further. "Take some time to settle in. I'll be back in an hour to show you around." After he left, Liara wandered the residence, her steps unhurried. Every detail intrigued her. She paused at a bookshelf filled with texts, physical books, something nearly extinct on Scytheron. Their spines bore titles in various languages, some familiar from her studies, others entirely foreign. She ran her fingers over the smooth covers, tempted to pull one free but unsure where to start. The sound of chirping drew her to a window. Outside, small winged creatures flitted between trees, their plumage vivid against the green canopy. Birds she recalled from her datapad studies, but seeing them in motion, hearing their calls, felt different than reading descriptions. She pressed her hand to the glass, marveling at their delicate beauty. For the first time, she felt a pang of longing, not for Zitharon, but for something she couldn't yet name. Was it freedom? Belonging? Or perhaps simply the chance to exist without judgment? Frank returned as promised, leading her on a tour of the compound. He introduced her to key personnel, each greeting her with polite curiosity. They didn't sneer or look through her as the Zarvokians had. Instead, their expressions ranged from friendly to cautiously respectful. It unsettled her. Respect was something she had never known outside of theory. At the training facility, Frank paused by a large, open space where humans practiced various forms of combat. Some sparred hand-to-hand, their movements fluid and precise, while others worked with weapons Liara couldn't identify. She watched, fascinated, as a pair of fighters engaged in a simulated duel, their staffs clashing with rhythmic intensity. "Impressive, isn't it?" Frank asked. She nodded. "They're disciplined. But their technique feels different from what I've seen before. Less brute force, more flow." Frank's eyes gleamed with approval. "Good observation. Humans value strategy over sheer strength. It's how we've survived against stronger opponents." Liara's gaze lingered on the fighters. For the first time, she felt a spark of curiosity about combat. On Scytheron, the training halls were places of humiliation for her, arenas where she could never measure up. Here, she wondered if it could be different. That evening, they dined together in a small sunlit room. The meal was simple: roasted vegetables, grains, and something called tofu, but its flavor surprised her. She hadn't realized how bland Zarvokian cuisine was until now. Frank leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. "You're quieter than I expected." Liara arched a brow. "What did you expect?" "I don't know," he admitted, his tone light. "Someone more defensive, maybe? You've been through a lot." She set her fork down carefully. "Defensiveness requires energy I don't have. Survival taught me to listen and wait." "Smart," he said. "But survival isn't enough. You deserve more than just getting by." His words struck her like a blow, not harsh but deeply personal. She held his gaze, searching for insincerity but found none. "And what do you think I deserve?" she asked quietly. "To find out what you're capable of," he replied without hesitation. "And not because someone else tells you, but because you decide for yourself." For a moment, she couldn't speak. No one had ever spoken to her like this. On Scytheron, her worth had always been measured by her failures. Here, Frank seemed to suggest she had a choice. It terrified her almost as much as it intrigued her. As the evening waned, Liara returned to her quarters. She stood by the window, staring out at the darkening forest, the sky painted with streaks of crimson and indigo. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. The world beyond the glass seemed vast, not in a way that overwhelmed her, but in a way that promised possibilities. Liara wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time she allowed herself to hope. The morning sun broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the forest-lined training grounds. The compound, usually quiet at this hour, hummed with faint energy. Birds flitted between treetops, their melodies filling the air with a sense of calm Liara had never experienced back on Scytherin. This was Earth's rhythm, natural, unforced, and alive. It both soothed and unnerved her. Liara stood near the edge of the training grounds, her cobalt blue skin shimmering faintly under the sunlight. She tightened the straps on her training uniform, a simple but functional outfit designed for movement. The fabric felt strange against her skin, a reminder of how different everything was here. She glanced toward Frank, who was adjusting a pair of training staffs near the arena's center. His easy confidence contrasted with her tension, but there was no hint of impatience in his demeanor. "You're early again," Frank called, his tone light but approving as he straightened. "Discipline starts with showing up," Liara replied, echoing his words from the previous day. She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her, unsure how to begin. Frank offered her one of the staffs. She took it, testing its weight. It was lighter than she expected, yet balanced. The alloy hummed faintly under her touch, a reminder of Earth's technological ingenuity. "First lesson," Frank said, stepping back to demonstrate. "Combat isn't about brute force. It's about control and adaptability. You don't overpower your opponent, you outthink them." He spun his staff in a wide arc, its tip cutting cleanly through the air. His movements were fluid, each transition seamless. Liara watched intently, noting how his body seemed to anticipate the staff's momentum, guiding rather than forcing it. She tried to mimic him, but her first attempt was stiff, the staff wobbling in her grip. "Relax," Frank said, stepping closer. "You're holding it like a sledgehammer. Let the staff move with you, not against you." She adjusted her grip, her movements slightly smoother this time. Frank circled her, offering corrections in his calm, measured tone. "Good. Now shift your weight. Your feet should feel like they're ready to move, not planted." The rhythm of the training began to settle over her. Each motion, though awkward at first, became more natural as she repeated it. Sweat beaded on her brow, but she refused to stop, her determination overriding her fatigue. By the third day, Liara's progress was undeniable. Her strikes, though still imperfect, carried precision. Her movements flowed with greater confidence. Frank introduced defensive techniques, showing her how to deflect attacks and counter with minimal effort. "Your instincts are good," he said during one session after she successfully blocked a feint. "But you're still thinking too much. Trust your body. Let it respond." Liara frowned, her grip tightening on the staff. "On Scytherin, I was told my body was useless. Weak." Frank's expression softened. Maybe that's because no one took the time to see what it could really do. His words struck her deeply, but she didn't respond. Instead, she resumed her stance, her movements sharper now, as if fueled by the memory of past scorn. Frank didn't press her further, letting her actions speak. One morning during a sparring session, something unexpected happened. Frank lunged forward, his staff aimed at her side in a calculated strike. Liara stepped back, her staff rising instinctively to block. Their weapons collided with a sharp crack, but as they did, a faint shimmer of light erupted where they met. Frank staggered back, his eyes widening. "What was that?" he asked, his voice a mix of surprise and curiosity. Liara stared at her hands, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. "I don't know," she admitted. Her palms tingled, a warmth spreading through them that felt both alien and familiar. Frank lowered his staff, studying her intently. "Try it again. Focus." She nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Closing her eyes, she concentrated on the feeling from moments before. Slowly, the warmth returned, pulsing faintly through her hands and into the staff. When she opened her eyes, the weapon glowed with a soft, silvery light. Frank stepped closer, his tone careful. "I've never seen anything like that. It's not just physical strength. This is something else." Liara released the energy, the staff returning to its inert state. Her breathing slowed, but her thoughts raced. "It felt natural," she said quietly, "but I don't understand it." Frank folded his arms, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Maybe you don't have to, not yet. For now, let's see what you can do with it." The discovery of her energy manipulation added a new dimension to her training. Frank encouraged her to experiment, setting up exercises that challenged her to channel the power in controlled bursts. It wasn't easy, the energy was unpredictable, surging and fading without warning. But Liara persisted, her focus sharpening with each session. One afternoon, as she practiced forming a concentrated sphere of energy, Frank watched from a distance, arms crossed. "Do you know what this means?" he asked, his tone serious. Liara paused, the sphere flickering out of existence. "What do you mean?" "This ability, it's not just rare. It's something that could redefine how your people see you, maybe even how they see themselves." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Liara looked away, her grip tightening on the staff. "They won't care. I've been an outcast my entire life. One skill won't change that." Frank stepped closer, his voice firm but kind. "You're underestimating yourself. This isn't just a skill. It's a statement, a challenge to everything they believe about strength." She met his gaze, her expression conflicted. "And what if they reject me again?" "Then it's their loss," Frank said simply. "But I don't think they will. You're stronger than you know, Liara." As the weeks passed, Liara's abilities grew. She learned to summon the energy with greater precision, using it to enhance her strikes or create barriers against incoming attacks. Her confidence blossomed, though she remained cautious, wary of what these powers might mean for her future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the training grounds in hues of gold and violet, Liara stood in the center of the arena. Her staff glowed faintly in her hands, the energy radiating outward like a tangible aura. Frank watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. "You've come a long way," he said after a moment, "but this is just the beginning." Liara nodded, her gaze steady. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of pride, not in what others saw, but in what she had discovered within herself. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time she felt ready to face it. The air in the command center felt heavy, weighed down by tension and anticipation. Bright monitors displayed streams of data, holographic maps hovered in midair, and voices buzzed in clipped, urgent tones. Liara stood near the room's center, her cobalt blue skin illuminated by the glow of the central console. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, but her body radiated tension. Something was coming. She could feel it. Frank entered the room, his steps purposeful but calm. He carried a small data pad in one hand, his expression a mixture of focus and worry. When he reached her side, he placed the device on the table, activating a projection. The image showed a fragmented communication, a distress signal laced with static. Liara frowned. "What am I looking at?" Frank adjusted the projection, clearing some of the interference. A figure in Zarvokian armor flickered into view, their voice distorted but unmistakably urgent. "This is Commander Varric, loyal servant of King Zorvith. Our forces are under attack, rebel factions allied with an unknown species. We require immediate assistance. The Empire." The signal cut off abruptly, leaving the room in a tense silence. Liara straightened. "Rebels?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Who are they?" Frank crossed his arms, his hazel eyes scanning her face. "We've known about unrest within the Zarvokian Empire for some time. Factions unhappy with your father's leadership. But this, an alliance with another species, changes things. It suggests the rebellion has grown far more organized and dangerous." Liara's mind raced. She had always been aware of her father's unyielding rule and the dissent it fostered, but she had assumed it was contained. This revelation turned her assumptions on their head. "They're calling for help," she said, her tone cautious. "Why? Zarvokians don't ask for aid." Frank leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Because they're losing. Whoever these rebels are working with, their technology and tactics are superior. Your father must be desperate if he's letting his commander send distress signals." Liara hesitated, her stomach twisting. Desperation wasn't something she associated with King Zorvath. His pride had always been unassailable, his arrogance towering. The idea of him asking for help felt almost surreal, and yet here it was. "What do you think?" Frank asked, studying her reaction. She met his gaze. "If they're calling for help, things are worse than we realize." Later that evening, Liara sat in her quarters, the weight of the situation pressing on her. Her room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. She stared out the window at the forest beyond, her thoughts churning. The Zarvokian Empire, for all its flaws, was her home. Her father might have dismissed her, but it was his throne at risk. And yet, the idea of returning to Zitharon filled her with dread. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Frank entered, carrying 2 steaming cups. He handed one to her, then took a seat across the room. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "but we need to talk about your role in this." Liara cradled the cup in her hands, the warmth grounding her. "My role," she echoed bitterly. "What role do I have? I'm the outcast princess they sent away to be someone else's problem. Frank shook his head. That's not who you are anymore. You've trained, grown, discovered a power they can't ignore. If anyone has the right to step in, it's you. She stared at him, torn between doubt and the flicker of hope he always seemed to ignite in her. And if they reject me again? Then it's their loss, he said simply. But this isn't just about them. It's about what you want. The question hung between them, unspoken but clear. What did she want? The next day, the compound was alive with activity. Preparations for a potential mission to Zitharan were underway, though nothing had been decided. Lyra walked through the corridors, her mind buzzing with uncertainty. She passed a group of engineers modifying a transport ship, their movements precise and practiced. A familiar voice called out to her. Princess. Lyra turned to see Dr. Alina Vega, the compound's lead scientist, approaching. The older woman carried a small device in one hand, her sharp eyes gleaming with curiosity. I thought you might want to see this, Alina said, handing her the device. We've been analyzing the energy signatures from your training sessions. Fascinating stuff. It's unlike anything we've seen, both biological and quantum in nature. Lyra studied the device, its screen displaying a complex array of data. What does it mean? It means, Alina said with a smile, that you're capable of things far beyond what we understand. And I suspect your people don't fully understand it either. The implication was clear. Lyra's powers weren't just a personal discovery, they could be a game changer for the Zarvokian Empire. She handed the device back, her resolve hardening. By nightfall, Lyra found Frank in the command center. He stood by the main console, reviewing holographic maps of Zitharan's territories. She approached quietly, but he sensed her presence and turned. I'm going, she said before he could speak. Her voice was steady, her expression resolute. I won't let them fall because of pride or fear. Frank nodded, his approval evident. Then we'll leave at dawn. The journey to Zitharan was tense but uneventful. Lyra spent most of the time in quiet reflection, mentally preparing herself for what awaited. Frank sat nearby, giving her space but offering the occasional reassuring glance. When they finally arrived, the planet loomed large before them, its twin suns casting a harsh light over the metallic spires of its cities. As their ship descended, Lyra's heart pounded. The weight of her return, of the Empire's expectations, pressed heavily on her. The landing bay was eerily quiet. A small delegation waited, their expressions wary. Among them was Commander Varric, the man from the distress signal. He bowed stiffly when Lyra stepped forward. Princess, he said, his voice formal but tinged with surprise. We weren't expecting you. Lyra straightened, her tone firm. Your signal reached us. I came to help. Varric hesitated, his gaze flickering to Frank. We didn't expect outsiders either. Frank stepped forward, his tone calm but commanding. We're not here to interfere. We're here to help. Let's focus on the threat. The tension in the room eased slightly, though it didn't disappear entirely. Varric gestured for them to follow, leading them into the heart of the base. As they walked, Lyra couldn't help but notice the signs of strained, damaged walls, exhausted soldiers, and a palpable sense of unease. The Empire was crumbling from within, and the sight filled her with equal parts sorrow and determination. That night, Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The spires that once symbolized unshakable strength now seemed fragile, their edges softened by time and conflict. She clenched her fists, the energy within her sparking faintly. This was her home, for better or worse, and she would fight for it, not for her father, not for the council, but for the people who still believed in something greater. The rebel ships moved like shadows across the violet sky of Zitharan, their dark hulls gleaming with stolen Zarvokian alloys. Explosions lit the horizon as the last of the outer defenses crumbled, leaving the Imperial Palace vulnerable. Smoke curled upward from the city below, filling the air with the acrid scent of burning metal and scorched earth. Lyra watched it all unfold from the observation deck, her chest tight with a mix of dread and determination. Behind her, the command center buzzed with frantic activity. Holographic displays projected the battlefield in stark detail. Flickering red markers showed the rebels' overwhelming forces encircling the capital. Officers barked orders, their voices tinged with desperation, while soldiers prepared for what many feared would be their final stand. Lyra turned from the window, her cobalt blue skin reflecting the pale light of the monitors. Her eyes locked on Commander Varric, who leaned over the central console, his face etched with frustration. "They've breached the inner perimeter," he said, his tone grim. "The palace shields won't hold much longer." Frank stepped forward, his presence steady amid the chaos. "What about the royal guard? Can they regroup and fortify the throne room?" Varric shook his head. "The guard is scattered, and we've lost communication with half our forces. The rebels are too organized." Liara stepped closer, her voice cutting through the noise. "They're organized because they have the alien faction backing them. Their technology is the key to this assault." Varric glanced at her, skepticism flickering in his eyes. "And what would you suggest, Princess? We're outnumbered and outgunned." Her gaze didn't waver. "We target their command ship. Without their central coordination, the rebellion collapses." The room fell silent. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, and even Frank hesitated. Finally, Varric spoke, his voice laced with doubt. "That's a suicide mission. Their defenses are not invincible," Liara interrupted, her tone firm. "They rely on their alien tech to maintain control. If we disrupt their systems, we create chaos. It's our only chance." Frank studied her for a moment, then nodded. "She's right. A coordinated strike could turn the tide." Varric frowned but didn't argue further. "Then who's leading this suicide mission?" Liara squared her shoulders, her voice steady. "I am." The hangar was a flurry of movement as the strike team prepared for departure. Soldiers loaded weapons and checked gear, their faces set with grim determination. Liara stood apart, adjusting the straps of her combat armor. The material clung to her form, lighter than the ceremonial garments of her past, but far more practical. Frank approached, holding a sleek energy blade. He extended it toward her with a small smile. "For luck," he said. She took it, her fingers curling around the hilt. "I'll make it count." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. No words could capture the enormity of what lay ahead, but they didn't need words. Together they boarded the stealth shuttle, the hum of its engines filling the air as it lifted off. The city below them was a battlefield. Fires burned unchecked, casting long shadows over the once pristine spires. Liara clenched her fists as the shuttle ascended, her resolve hardening. This was her home, and she would fight for it, not for her father, but for the people who had been caught in the crossfire of his reign. The rebel command ship loomed ahead, its dark silhouette bristling with weaponry. Pulses of blue light rippled across its surface, a testament to the alien technology powering its systems. Liara's stomach churned as the shuttle neared the docking bay. The enormity of the mission pressed down on her, but she pushed the fear aside. There was no room for doubt. Frank's voice broke the silence. "We'll breach here," he said, pointing to a holographic map of the ship. "Team Alpha will disable the communications array. Team Beta will create a diversion. Liara, you're heading for the command center." She nodded, her grip tightening on the energy blade. "Understood." The shuttle docked with a jarring thud, and the team moved quickly, slipping through the corridors with practiced precision. The air inside the ship was cold and sterile, the metallic walls reflecting the dim emergency lighting. Liara's heart pounded as the first wave of rebel soldiers appeared. Their mismatched armor and alien weapons marked them as deserters who had embraced the rebellion's cause. The battle was immediate and brutal. Liara moved with purpose, her energy flaring to life as she deflected incoming fire. Her staff glowed with a silvery light, the energy within her pulsing in rhythm with her strikes. The rebels faltered, their confidence shaken by the force they had underestimated. "Go," she shouted, covering Team Alpha as they pushed toward the communications array. The sound of weapons fire echoed in her ears, but she stayed focused, her every movement calculated. Reaching the command center felt like stepping into another world. The room was vast, its walls lined with glowing panels that pulsed with alien energy. At its center stood the rebel general, his blackened armor gleaming under the harsh light. Beside him loomed an alien figure, its elongated limbs and shimmering skin a stark contrast to the Zarvokian form. "So the princess returns," the general sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Did you come to beg for forgiveness?" Liara didn't flinch. "No, I came to end this." The alien tilted its head, its voice a melodic hum. "You are unexpected, a deviation." Liara tightened her grip on her staff. "And you made a mistake." The battle began with ferocious intensity. The general attacked with calculated precision, his strikes powerful and relentless. Liara met him blow for blow, her movements honed by weeks of training and a lifetime of resilience. Her energy pulsed around her, deflecting his attacks and forcing him back. The alien joined the fray, its attacks unlike anything she had faced. Pulses of light and sound disrupted her rhythm, forcing her to adapt. She drew on everything she had learned, weaving between their strikes with a fluidity that surprised even herself. When an opening appeared, she seized it. A concentrated burst of energy sent the alien sprawling, its eerie hum turning into a piercing wail. The general hesitated, his confidence shattered. Liara didn't give him a chance to recover. With a decisive strike, she disarmed him, her blade pressed against his throat. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "It is," she said, her tone cold. "Your rebellion dies here." The alien, its form flickering, retreated into a shimmering portal, leaving the general behind. Liara watched it disappear, a sense of unease settling over her. The battle was won, but the alien's retreat felt calculated, as if it had more to play. Back on Zitharon, the sight of the retreating rebel forces brought a collective cheer from the defenders. The palace was safe for now. Liara stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the fires below slowly extinguishing. The spires still stood, but the scars of the rebellion were undeniable. Frank joined her, his presence steady as always. "You did it," he said quietly. "For now," she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. But this was just the beginning. The victory was bittersweet. The rebellion had been quelled, but the alien faction's true motives remained a mystery. Liara knew they would return, and when they did, she would be ready. For the first time, she felt the weight of her role not as a pawn, but as a leader. The throne room of Zitharon stood in quiet defiance of the chaos it had endured. The polished metallic walls, once symbols of Zarvokian dominance, bore faint scorch marks and cracks from the recent rebellion. The royal banners hung in tatters, their silver threads catching the pale light that filtered through the fractured stained glass windows. At the room's center, King Zorvath sat on the high throne, his imposing figure diminished by the weight of defeat. Liara entered, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. She wore no ceremonial garb, only her battle-worn armor, still streaked with soot and blood. Her cobalt-blue skin gleamed faintly under the light, and her energy pulsed within her, a silent testament to the power she had wielded in the Empire's darkest hour. The king's golden eyes met hers, his expression unreadable. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of distant repairs reverberating through the palace. Frank stood behind Liara, his presence a steadying force, though he kept his distance. This was her moment. "You came back," Zorvath said, his voice low but steady. "Against my expectations." Liara stopped a few paces from the throne, her back straight, her chin held high. "I didn't come for you," she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "I came for the people you failed to protect." The king's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he gestured for her to approach. "Then tell me, princess, what would you have done differently?" She stepped forward, each movement deliberate. "I would have listened. To their grievances, their struggles, their needs. You ruled with strength but no understanding, and it nearly destroyed us." A flicker of something regret perhaps crossed Zorvath's face, but it vanished quickly. And yet here we stand. The rebellion crushed, the empire intact. "For now," Liara said, her voice firm. "But the alien threat hasn't disappeared. They used our weakness against us, and they'll return when we're vulnerable again." Zorvath leaned back in his throne, his gaze heavy. "You speak as if you understand them." "I understand enough," she said. "They're opportunistic, strategic. They don't care about our conflicts, they care about domination. And if we don't change, we'll hand them our empire without a fight." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Zorvath studied her, his expression a mixture of pride and resignation. "You've changed, Liara. You're not the weak girl I sent away." "No," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm not, and I won't let this empire fall because of your pride." The council convened the following morning, their faces a tapestry of skepticism, curiosity, and exhaustion. Liara stood at the center of the chamber, flanked by Frank and Commander Varric. The once confident nobles and generals now seemed hesitant, their authority shaken by the rebellion's near success. One of the elder counselors spoke first, his voice laced with condescension. "Why are we listening to her? She abandoned this empire long ago." "I was cast out," Liara corrected, her voice steady but sharp. "Because I didn't fit your narrow definition of strength. Yet here I am, after saving your lives, standing in the ashes of your failure." The council murmured uneasily. Frank stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. She's right. You were nearly overrun because you underestimated the rebellion and their allies. Liara saw what you couldn't. Another counselor, younger and more cautious, leaned forward. And what do you propose, Princess? How do we rebuild? Liara met his gaze, her expression resolute. By changing what we value. Strength alone isn't enough. We need adaptability, unity, and foresight. We need alliances not just with Earth, but with other species willing to stand against the alien threat. Her words drew murmurs of dissent, but she pressed on. The rebellion exposed our weaknesses. If we don't learn from this, we'll fall the next time the aliens strike. Varric, who had been silent until now, stood. She's right. I fought beside her. I saw her lead. Liara is the future of this empire. The room fell silent. Slowly, the murmurs shifted, the counselors exchanging thoughtful glances. The elder who had dismissed her earlier finally spoke, his tone grudging. Perhaps she has earned a chance to prove herself. In the days that followed, Liara worked tirelessly. She collaborated with Earth's engineers to fortify Exit Theron's defenses, incorporating alien technology salvaged from the command ship. She met with survivors of the rebellion, listening to their stories and promising reforms that would address their grievances. For the first time, the people saw a leader who didn't just command from above but stood among them. Frank watched her from a distance one evening as she oversaw the installation of a new planetary shield. Her presence radiated purpose, her commands efficient but compassionate. He approached her, a faint smile on his lips. "You're doing it," he said. "Building something better." She turned to him, her expression softening. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shrugged. "Maybe, but this is your victory." Before she could respond, an aide approached, holding a holographic tablet. "Princess, a transmission from the outer colonies. You need to see this." Liara took the tablet, her expression growing grim as she read the report. Frank leaned in, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" "Unidentified ships," she said. "Skirmishes near the border. The aliens are testing our defenses." Frank's jaw tightened. "They're not done." "No," she said, her voice steady, "but neither are we." The coronation came weeks later, a ceremony unlike any Scytherin had seen. Gone were the ostentatious displays of power and wealth. Instead, it was a solemn but hopeful gathering, the palace thronged with citizens who had come to witness history. Liara stood before the throne, not in the ceremonial garb of her predecessors, but in a simple, battle-worn uniform. It was a statement this was a new era, and she would lead by example. Zorvath approached, holding the royal sigil. For a moment he hesitated, his golden eyes meeting hers. "You've earned this," he said quietly, placing the sigil in her hands. "Don't let them forget what it cost." "I won't," she replied, her voice firm. As she turned to face the crowd, the hall erupted in cheers. For the first time in her life, Liara felt not scorn or pity but respect. She raised the sigil high, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and determination. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges. The alien threat loomed, and the scars of rebellion would take years to heal. But for the first time, Scytheron had hope not in its weapons or its walls, but in a leader who embodied both strength and compassion. Liara smiled, a quiet but unshakable resolve in her eyes. This was her empire now, and she would fight for it with everything she had.